Hi, kids. I can't believe it's already been a month since the last recording. I hope that you all are being safe and being smart, wearing your masks when you're outside, and just being smart. That's kind of the only way that we're all going to get through this. So, I am here to teach you your lesson this week. And I'm very excited about this lesson. So, it is definitely going to apply to what's going on in the world today. I think you're gonna see that too. So, how about we come into the classroom? So close your eyes and imagine that you're coming into the classroom. Okay, and as you do on the chalkboard, it's going to be written the affirmation, the daily affirmation. And the affirmation this week is, I find within myself the power to do what is right. So, if you don't mind, let's say it 2 times together. I find within myself the power to do what is right. Let's take a deep breath. Smell the flower and blow it out. Let's say it one more time. I find within myself the power to do what is right. So this week, we're going to talk about willpower. And willpower is when you muster up the courage to do something that you want to do, right? This week, though, I learned this, and I think that this is just a beautiful explanation of willpower. And it says, willpower is your willingness combined with divine inner power. That's the God power inside of us. So your willingness, and power, God power inside of us, becomes willpower. And with our willpower, it says, I also loved this, that to do things, especially doing the right thing, sometimes doing what is right and good is not easy. And others will stand against us. But through our willpower, we can stand tall in the face of fear and hate, and with courage continue to do what is right. There's a lot of thoughts that go behind this, and one of them is straight from the Bible. And it is in Luke 10:27. And it says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and all your mind. But it doesn't stop there. It then says, and love your neighbor as yourself. That means that we have to treat others with the same respect and love that we feel for ourselves. And sometimes that's not easy. Sometimes that's pretty hard, right? So, the other thing that I want to share with you is the word grace. And it says here that grace means the power of love that flows through the universe. And when we open our hearts to possibilities that we can't even see, then grace can flow through our lives more strongly. So think about that. Grace is the power of love that flows through the universe. This week's lesson was so rich with meaning for me. So now I'm going to share with you this week's lesson, and it touched me. This week's lesson is about a woman named Harriet Tubman. I'm going to show you a picture of Harriet Tubman, first of all. I loved that this gives us a picture this week. She was a real person. This is Harriet Tubman. And this story is from 200 years ago. She lived 200 years ago, which really isn't that long ago if you really think about it. So I'm going to start the lesson by reminding you guys and gals and kids that you may have been hearing words that are happening outside in the world about Black Lives Matter. And Harriet Tubman is a big reason why we say that, and why 200 years later, sometimes things are still not right. And so we, as a community, as a people, we are coming together to try and make things right for the Black community. So, some of the things back in 1820 that Harriet did not have. You gotta find it. Sorry about flipping through the papers. I don't know if that's loud for you. Here we go. So here's some of the obstacles. Before I read the story, I want you to remember these things, okay? So back in 1820, women had no rights. Like even me, I would have had no rights. I certainly would not be able to be free and live on my own and make my own choices. So imagine if you're Black in 1820 and you're a slave. And that means that you belong to someone else. It means that somebody owns you. Like you have no choice, right? So here's some of the things that Harriet faced before I tell you her story. So in the back of your mind, I want you to know who she was. She was born into slavery. Again, she was owned by somebody else. She had no choice about anything. I mean nothing. She was a female, and at that time, females of any race had no rights. She did not get any education. She could not read or write. She had a physical handicap. She was under constant stress and danger for most of her life, and she feared for her life. She was poor all of her life. She worked for the army for years and did not get paid. She lived without any of the luxuries that we have. So she had no she had no electricity, she had no water, she had no plumbing. That means she didn't have a toilet or a bathroom. She couldn't take a shower. Those kinds of things. No telephone. Here's what she did. She got herself out of slavery. She rescued others from slavery. Leaders and generals and governors listened to her and respected her. She never showed fear or complained about her life. She helped people without expecting money in return. She made use of what little she had, and what she did have, she shared. Helped fight for the women's right to vote. Saved many lives when she worked as a nurse and a spy for the Union Army. Established a home for poor elderly African Americans. She was awarded a silver medal for bravery from the Queen of England. She was the first woman to lead an army expedition into the war. And she freed over 700 slaves, succeeding in the mission, and lost not one life. So everyone she rescued lived. She was so amazing. And so I'm drilling this into you because I want you to know this, so that when you sit back and listen to this story, you're going to be like, wow. Okay. So now, let's settle in. Let's do a couple more deep breaths. Let's smell the flower. And blow the flower. Let's do it again. This time I want you to hold your breath a little bit. And as you breathe in, I want you to breathe in and you imagine that it's the light of God, so that now you can listen with your ears and also with your heart. You ready? Let's breathe again. Okay, sit back and listen. This is a great story. It's called Harriet Tubman's Willpower. In the year 1820, almost all black people in the United States were slaves. Slaves had no rights. They were owned by another person and had no choices about their lives. Harriet Tubman was born to parents who were slaves, and that meant that Harriet was a slave too. Harriet's mother and father could not protect her from the cruelties of slavery, and she was forced to work hard from a very young age. She took care of babies, and she did work in the master's house and out in the field. Even as a young child, she was sent out in the winter to check muskrat traps. Muskrats are large rodents, like rats, that live in underwater dens and were trapped for their fur. Harriet had to walk waist deep in freezing water and retrieve the dead muskrats. Although she never learned to read and write, Harriet was smart, was always listening and watching and learning. She was never a slave in her heart. She never accepted that she was unworthy just because she was black or because she was a girl. She learned to pad herself with extra clothing for protection during frequent beatings. When Harriet was about 11, she boldly refused an order from a white man to help stop his runaway slave. Instead, she stood back and let the slave run by her. The man angrily threw a very heavy metal weight after the runaway, but it hit Harriet in the head. The weight broke Harriet's skull and almost killed her. And unfortunately, this kind of cruelty was not unusual and uncommon. And Harriet wasn't even given medical care, and she wasn't allowed to see a doctor. She recovered, but she suffered for the rest of her life with pain, seizures, and blackouts as the result of this injury. She couldn't read, but she told stories from the Bible, and Harriet had a deep inner life of prayer. She always tried to follow the guidance she felt from God, and everyone who knew her said that she showed amazing inner strength and appeared to be fearless. After years of struggle and thinking about being free, Harriet heard she was to be sold and taken further south, and where freedom would be impossible to find. She prayed and planned an escape. She took 2 of her brothers with her, but her brothers turned back. It was too frightening to be out in the dark woods, possibly getting lost, shot, or recaptured. Harriet didn't want to give up, so she went back with them. Then, Harriet prayed and planned again. She wouldn't let anything stop her. The second time she went alone, traveling almost 100 miles to the state of Pennsylvania, where blacks were free. She could have stayed in Pennsylvania and lived a safe life, but Harriet felt she had to help others escape a life of slavery. So, instead of staying, she went back to the South and led others to freedom. She could have been caught or killed or sold or taken far away, but she went anyway. Harriet made 19 dangerous trips to the South and brought many of her friends and family and even strangers to a new life where they were no longer slaves. Harriet used all of her courage and willpower to make the trips. There were rewards given to people who turned in runaway slaves, and anyone willing to help had to do it in secret. People in secret places that were used to get slaves to freedom were called the Underground Railroad, and Harriet was called the conductor. Harriet often disguised herself as a man or an old person so she and her passengers wouldn't get caught. She gave babies medicine so they would sleep and not cry while they were hiding. If anyone wanted to give up and go back, she refused to let them go, because a slave who went back would be beaten or killed and forced to give away secret information that would endanger others and tell others about the railroad, the Underground Railroad. Every trip was a double risk for Harriet, because she had to travel to the people who wanted help, and then she had to travel back to the North with them. There were many angry slave owners who would have killed her for what she was doing, yet Harriet never gave up and never lost one passenger. Her most important trip was going back to her former home and getting her parents to come north with her. They lived the rest of their lives in Canada, where they had the joy of knowing freedom. Harriet, remember, was a small, uneducated Black woman who lived during a time when Black people could be bought and sold, and when women of any race had very few rights. She had a lifelong debilitating illness that would have kept most people from even leaving their home. She was always poor and had to work hard every day just to survive. Yet, during Harriet's long life of 93 years, she repeatedly proved that she had, by applying willpower in the right direction, with determination and an open heart, there are unlimited possibilities. Her determination to do what was right and help others was an inspiration to slaves and to those who were free, to men and women, to those in the North and the South, to people of every race and color, and to generations who came after her. That is the story of Harriet Tubman. Now, I have a couple more questions for you. The first one is, do you know anything about slaves getting freedom? I'm going to pause for a minute here. So, again, the Black Lives Matter movement that's happening right now is super important, super important. And here's why. Because if your skin was dark, you and black, you were a slave. So you had no rights. And then President Abraham Lincoln in 1862 did a thing, it's called the Proclamation of Emancipation. Proclamation of Emancipation. Emancipation Proclamation. It's the other way around. Emancipation Proclamation. That emancipation means free and proclamation means order. So he wrote into law and he said that no more, there can be no more slaves. The thing is that here in Texas, so we're far away from Washington, D.C. and Pennsylvania and all those areas up north. We're very far. In fact, at the time in the 1800s, we were one of the farthest south. And so the information that kind of trickled down, it took a long time to get here. And so here in Texas, June 19th of 1865, that's 3 years later, we finally freed all the slaves. That's why we celebrate Juneteenth. We finally freed all the slaves. And that's a big deal. But we were one of the last ones to do that. So, in 1865. The other question is, have you ever tried to walk through the woods at night with a flashlight? Without a flashlight. Or have you even walked like around your neighborhood, or imagine turning off all the lights in your house and just walking through your house without any lights, no lights at all, no flashlight, no lights, okay? It's very dark. How do you think it felt to Harriet and the slaves to travel in the dark while being hunted? So that courage that she had to have in order to continue day after day to do this, that is grace, that is the love that floats through the universe, and that is willpower, her willingness, and the power of God inside of her that made that happen. Another question is, do you know anyone who has character traits like Harriet Tubman? And I got to thinking about that, and I know a lot of people in my life. And I'm not without naming specifics, but I know a lot of people that have stood up for a lot of things, and done what's right, and led marches and led protests. And so, yeah. And the next question is, how are they like her? And the truth is, they're like her because even though it's not the easy thing to do, it's the right thing to do. In fact, sometimes it was the hardest thing to do. And the last question goes to you guys is, have you ever stood up against someone who was being cruel and mean to another person or an animal? And if you did, were you scared? So I'm gonna challenge you kids that if you see someone being mean to someone else because of any reason, the color of their skin, or they look different, or they sound different, or if you see somebody being bullied because they're smaller, stand up. Stand up and do what's right. And it's going to be hard in your lifetime, but there is no greater feeling in the world than standing up and doing what's right. So, with that lesson this week, let's close it out. Let's close it out with the prayer of protection, because I imagine that although Harriet Tubman may not have known our prayer of protection, I imagine that she said a prayer of protection of her own every minute of every day while she was doing what she was doing. So, let's do our prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. And all is well. Namaste. Take care. We miss you. We look forward to seeing you again. And just know that we love you. We bless you. We appreciate you. And we behold the Christ in each one of you. And until we meet again, continue to do the right thing. And thank you for letting me teach you your lesson this week. Bye.